morning. Welcome to This Week. Crisis overseas. An ambassador and 3 other Americans murdered.
How could this happen?
American embassies throughout the region under fire.
The world must stand together to unequivocally reject these brutal acts.
The people did not trade the tyranny of a dictator for the tyranny of a mob.
And anti-American protests spreading around the world. What's behind the attacks? Could more be on the way? Did the Obama administration do enough to prevent the violence? And with fewer than 2 months until Election Day, how will the crisis overseas impact the presidential election here at home?
An apology for America's values is never the right course.
We'll get the very latest on the threat abroad and to the homeland from the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, and from Christiana Amanpour, Martha Raddatz, and Brian Ross. Plus, full debate and analysis of the political fallout on our Powerhouse Roundtable with George Will, Jonathan Karl, General Wesley Clark, Gwen Ifill of PBS, and Liz Cheney from Fox News.
From ABC News, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's your voice, your vote. Reporting from the Newsroom in Washington, Jake Tepper.
Hello again, George Stephanopoulos has the morning off. We are now in the home stretch, just 51 days until the election, and our Powerhouse Roundtable is standing by to get to all the week's politics. But first, the crisis that has the potential to shake up the presidential race, the murder of 4 Americans, including the U.S. ambassador, in Benghazi, Libya on Tuesday, and the wave of anti-American protests and violence now sweeping the globe. For more on what happened and why, let's bring in the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Dr. Susan Rice. Dr. Rice, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, Jake.
So first of all, what is the latest you can tell us on who these attackers were? What's the latest information?
Well, Jake, first of all, it's important to know that there's an FBI investigation that has begun and will take some time to be completed. That will tell us with certainty what transpired. But our current best assessment, based on the information that we have at present, is that in fact what this began as was a spontaneous, not a premeditated, response to what had transpired in Cairo. In Cairo, as you know, a few hours earlier, there was a violent protest that was undertaken in reaction to this very offensive video that was disseminated. We believe that folks in Benghazi, a small number of people came to the embassy or to the consulate rather, to replicate this sort of challenge that was posed in Cairo. And then as that unfolded, it seems to have been hijacked, let us say, by some individual clusters of extremists who came with heavier weapons, weapons that, as you know, in the wake of the revolution in Libya are quite common and accessible. And it then evolved from there. We'll wait to see exactly what the investigation finally confirms, but that's the best information we have at present.
Why was there such a security breakdown? Why was there not better security at the compound in Benghazi? Why were there not U.S. Marines at the embassy in Tripoli?
Well, first of all, we had a substantial security presence with our personnel.
Enough, though, right?
With our personnel and the consulate in Benghazi. Tragically, 2 of the 4 Americans who were killed were there providing security. That was their function. And indeed, there were many other colleagues who were doing the same with them. It obviously didn't prove sufficient to the nature of the attack and sufficient in that moment. And that's why, obviously, we have reinforced our remaining presence in Tripoli, why the president has been very clear that in Libya and throughout the region, we are going to call on the governments, first of all, to assume their responsibilities to protect our facilities and our personnel, and we're reinforcing our facilities and our embassies where possible.
Why would we not have Marines at the embassy in Tripoli to begin with? It would seem like this is obviously an unstable country. This is a region where U.S. interests have been attacked in previous months. Why were there not Marines there to begin with?
First of all, there are Marines in some places around the world. They're not Marines in every facility. That depends on the circumstances. That depends on the requirements. Our presence in Tripoli, as in Benghazi, is relatively new, as you will recall. We've been back post-revolution only for a matter of months. But I visited there myself, both Tripoli and Benghazi. I was very grateful to have a strong security presence with me as part of our embassy detachment there. So we certainly are aware that Libya is a place where there have been increasingly some violent incidents. The security personnel that the State Department thought were required were in place. And we'll see when the investigation unfolds whether what transpired in Benghazi might have unfolded differently in different circumstances. But the President has been very clear the protection of American personnel and facilities is and will remain our top priority. That's why we've reinforced our presence in Tripoli and elsewhere.
There have been protests around the world over the last several days, and President Obama pledged to repair America's relationships with the Muslim world. Why does the U.S. seem so impotent, and why is the U.S. even less popular today in some of these Muslim and Arab countries than it was 4 years ago?
Jake, we're not impotent. We're not even less popular to challenge that assessment. I don't know on what basis you make that judgment, but let me.
It just seems that the U.S. government is powerless as this maelstrom erupts.
It's actually the opposite. First of all, let's be clear about what transpired here. What happened this week in Cairo, in Benghazi, and many other parts of the region
Tunisia, Khartoum,
was a direct result of a heinous and offensive video that was widely disseminated, that the U.S. government had nothing to do with, which we have made clear is reprehensible and disgusting. We have also been very clear in saying that there is no excuse for violence. That we have condemned it in the strongest possible terms. But let's look at what's happened. It's quite the opposite of being impotent. We have worked with the governments in Egypt. President Obama picked up the phone and talked to President Morsi in Egypt, and as soon as he did that, the security provided to our personnel and our embassies dramatically increased. President Morsi,
it took 2 days for President Morsi to say anything about
President Morsi has been out repeatedly and said that he condemns this violence. He's called off, and his people have called off any further demonstrations and have made very clear that this has to stop.
Well,
and same, frankly, in Tunisia, in Yemen, and of course in Libya, where the government has gone out of its way to try to step up security and express deepest remorse for what has happened. We are quite popular in Libya, as you might expect, having been a major partner in their revolution. What transpired outside of our consulate in Benghazi was not an expression of deep-seated anti-Americanism on the part of the Libyan people. Quite the contrary. The counter-demonstrations, the outpouring of sympathy and support for Ambassador Stevens and for the United States, the government of Libya and the people on the streets saying how pained they are by this is much more a reflection of the sentiment towards the United States than a small handful of heavily armed mobsters.
That certainly, according to polling, is the case in Libya, not the case in Egypt. And since you brought up President Morsi, let me try to get some clarification on something. President Obama was asked about the relationship with Egypt on Wednesday, and this is what he said.
I don't think that we would consider them an ally, but we don't consider them an enemy. They are a new government that is trying to find its way.
The United States has sent billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money to Egypt over the last few decades. And by definition, as you know, according to the State Department, Egypt is a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Why would President Obama say Egypt is not an ally?
Well, first of all, the President has been very clear, and everybody understands that Egypt is a very critical partner of the United States, has long been so. That relationship remains the same, and the President wasn't signaling any change in
was he
nature.
Trying to nudge Morsi?
The President wasn't signaling any change in the nature of our relationship. Obviously, the President had a conversation with President Morsi, a very productive one, in which he underscored that it's, of course, the responsibility of the Egyptian government as host to protect diplomatic personnel and facilities, including our own. And we saw the President Morsi immediately after that took dramatic steps to improve the security of our facilities in Cairo and elsewhere, and then went out and repeatedly made a number of very important and powerful statements condemning the violence and conveying the message that however hateful such a video may be, there is absolutely no justification for violence against the United States or other Western partners. So what we've seen is that the President has been incredibly calm, incredibly steady, incredibly measured in his approach to this set of developments. And his interventions, his leadership, has ensured that in Egypt, in Yemen, in Tunisia, in Libya, and many other parts of the world, that leaders have come out and made very plain that there's no excuse for this violence. We heard Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey say the same. We heard the Grand Mufti in Saudi Arabia say the same, that there's no excuse for violence, that violence is to be condemned, and that governments have a responsibility to protect United States personnel and facilities, and those of all foreign diplomats.
Was the President in that interview trying to nudge President Morsi, get your act together?
No, I think that the President communicated directly with President Morsi and had the opportunity to underscore our expectation that Egypt will do what it can to protect our facilities. So that was conveyed very directly, and the results were immediate and quite satisfactory.
Dr. Rice, thank you so much for coming here today and answering our questions.
Good to be with you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Week. I'm Jake Tapper. And we're joined now by my colleagues and friends, Martha Raddatz, Brian Ross, and Christiane Amanpour. Christiane, let's begin with you. You covered the Arab Spring. You had those exclusive interviews we all remember with Egyptian President Mubarak, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and with Mohamed Morsi, now the president of Egypt. And Christiane, I know you've interviewed the prime ministers of Libya, Egypt, and the spokesman for the Muslim Brotherhood. What are they telling you about these protests? Who's behind them? Who's behind the attack in Benghazi?
Well, what they're saying first and foremost is that obviously this has nothing to do with the governments. They don't support this. They've called them back, they say. And today the Muslim Brotherhood has said that we've made plenty of arrests and we should know in the next few days that they're trying to recalibrate and put their relations with the United States back on the correct track. They're very, very concerned that this should not disrupt their relations with the United States, whether it's the Egyptian Prime Minister who told me that, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Libyan Prime Minister. And I think it's also important to recognize that this is a seminal moment, Jake, for these Arab emerging democracies. The people have spoken. By and large, they've gone well. By and large, this is a success story. But as we've seen, there are elements that are out of control, most particularly in Libya, where you've got these armed people who are not yet under the government control, not brought into the, under the rule of law. But in Egypt, they say that they've got it under control, and they're very concerned that they want to maintain their relationships and not have this, deter them from their strong relationship with the U.S.
Brian, let's talk about the homeland for a second. This week, there were 3 college campuses where there were bomb scares, apparently all false alarms, but they were false alarms, but they were all called in. Is there a worry that this wave of attacks could spread to the United States, to the homeland itself?
Well, there's concern that those bomb threats washed out as a real threat. There was an arrest yesterday in Chicago, an 18-year-old who wanted to blow up a bar in Chicago as part of sort of a sympathy for what's going on in the world against the Muslims. But in general, they see no organized plan to disrupt or to attack in this country. But there are independent operators who could be inspired.
Martha, you've been to these embassies. How is security arranged? How is it decided who gets Marines, who doesn't? How do they decide when the protests are coming, what they can do to calm things and when they will actually make things worse if they get involved?
Well, I think that's a real fine line. In Yemen particularly, I was watching this week, and that embassy is very, very hard to breach. You have the host nation, usually on the outer perimeter. They're in charge of security there. But getting inside, you usually have Americans there backing them up, whether they're contractors or security. If you saw those mobs coming, I suppose you would say, let's go after them. But they can't really do that in all these cases. I think particularly in Yemen, they did a pretty good job of just letting them climb the walls but not get over the walls. You don't want to use deadly force if you don't have to, because it makes it much worse. But there are a lot of questions, Jake. You asked a very good question of Susan Rice. Why weren't there Marines in Tripoli in particular?
She didn't answer it.
I'm pretty sure there are Marines in Paris. Why weren't they in Tripoli? And I think that's a question the State Department is looking at right now. In Benghazi, I think we had 25 or 30 people in the entire consulate. How many of those really were security? They overran the perimeter so quickly and were able to get to that main building so fast. That is a huge question.
And Brian, you heard them talk about the YouTube video. You heard Dr. Rice talk about the YouTube video. They're hanging a lot on this YouTube video. You've been looking into the guy behind, the filmmaker, the main filmmaker behind it. What was his motivation? Why did he, first of all, initially falsely claim to be a Jew, an Israeli Jew, and what was he trying to do with this video?
Clearly, he was trying to stir things up with his false claims that he was an Israeli Jew, as he put it, that the money for this came from Jewish donors. In fact, the money came from his wife's family in Egypt, and he was attempting just to stir things up, I think, with this very provocative film.
He's a Coptic Christian.
Coptic Christian, the issues in Egypt between Coptic Christians and extremist Muslims, but he sought to create a hate film. The film was never really produced, just the trailer that was put on YouTube.
It's really like a home video,
like
isn't it? And one person can cause this.
And what, I was going to say, it's so interesting that the actors that were called to say the words, Master George was the main bad guy there. Yeah. And they dubbed in those 3 syllables with Muhammad.
I mean, it was clearly a film designed to incite, and it's a film designed by an extremist with extremist views here that plays right into the extremist provocateurs over there. But one thing I was really worried about, first of all, this cynical and dastardly attempt to stoke more hatred by pretending he was Jewish, and now it reveals that he's a Christian. You know, there have been very tense relations between Coptic Christians and Muslims in Egypt, and the one thing I asked the Muslim Brotherhood, is this going to cause a backlash? Absolutely not. We are standing absolutely firm. We're not going to let this have any impact on our relations, because that's possibly a very, very, difficult fallout that could happen. I'm pleased that nothing happened in Afghanistan. I think that's really important is to know that, again, this is a seminal moment. These governments have mostly done the right thing, not just now, but in the lead up to all of this. They're mostly moderate. They want good relationships with the rest of the world. Yes, the people are going to have a voice because these are democracies now in foreign policy going ahead. But as Susan said, and as others have said, look, in Libya, more than half the people support not just U.S. leadership, but the United States and the people of the United States. So I think that should be the takeaway, I think.
Martha, before we end this roundtable, I do want to look forward. And right now we have, in the Gulf, the largest naval exercise ever in the history of the Middle East. What is the message that the United States military is trying to send here? Is it directly aimed at Iran?
I think it's a pretty obvious message, and I don't think anyone would actually tell you that on camera, Jake, but I think it's pretty obvious the message to Iran is don't even try to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. They've got all these minesweeping exercises. It is an enormous exercise. Yes, they normally do exercise, but nothing like this, and they're building up all sorts of missile defense type things in there as well.
And Christiane, just looking forward, the United Nations General Assembly meets this week, and there's a lot of tension right now between Israel and Iran, but also between Israel and the Obama administration. What do you anticipate will happen this week?
Well, we've all been, listening to how they're not going to meet the leaders of the United States and Israel. But I think what's really interesting, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, Ehud Barak, the Israeli defense minister, is starting to walk back the idea of an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. The internal intelligence and defense, by and large, inside Israel has been very lukewarm, if not downright negative, on the idea of a unilateral Israeli attack. I'm being told that that's possibly sort of receding as a possibility, at least any time now. But then, and of course, the Israeli people do not want to see their country unilaterally attack Iran. And I think really what we have to know is whether there's going to be any real significant chance for proper negotiations, this negotiation that's going on right now with Iran and the West and the United States, whether that can come to some kind of agreement beyond, short of a kind of military intervention.
And Brian, very quickly, because we're running out of time, what are your sources telling you about how far the Iranians are when it comes to actually building a nuclear device?
4 to 6 weeks away if they've made the decision to do it.
They are able to acquire as much.
That is some of the intelligence, but they haven't made that decision. That's the key.
It's so vastly disparate. I mean, others say that, it could be a year after a year. So, this is a guessing game that's gone on for years.
Yeah, that's right. That's the latest claim.
All right, Christiane, Brian, Martha, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Great insights. When we come back, our Powerhouse Roundtable weighs in on all the week's politics.
There's a new poll out today. It claims that 58% of Americans believe Barack Obama would beat Mitt Romney in a fistfight. Maybe we could wrap this election up tonight. We make it a pay-per-view. We can wipe out the national debt in one night if we had it.
With polls showing a slight Obama lead, is it time for Republicans to start worrying? And the iPhone 5. Economic stimulus?
Today, Apple unveiled the iPhone 5, which is 20% lighter and 18% thinner. Yeah. In fact, it's just a piece of paper that says you saps will buy anything.
There's something I want you all to know. I'm not worried. Not in the least. Our campaign has a secret weapon. And that secret weapon is speaking right now in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Mitt Romney. And I understand the hardships facing ordinary Americans. For example, this summer, one of my horses failed to medal at the Olympics, so I know hardship.
We're joined now by George Will, Fox News contributor Liz Cheney, he's also the co-founder of Keep America Safe, retired General Wesley Clark, ABC senior political correspondent Jonathan Karl, and Gwen Eiffel, moderator of PBS's Washington Week and senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Welcome, one and all. Lots to chew over. George, this week, Romney senior foreign policy advisor Richard Williamson said of the situation in the last week unfolding throughout the Muslim world, there's a pretty compelling story that if you had a President Romney, you'd be in a different situation. Is there?
No. The great superstition of American politics concerns presidential power, and during a presidential year that reaches an apogee, and it becomes national narcissism. Everything that happens anywhere in the world, we caused, or we could cure with a tweak of presidential rhetoric. Jay Carney participated in this when he said the riots in the Middle East are not about U.S. policy, they're about a video. Actually, they're about neither. If the video hadn't been the pretext, another one would have been found. There are sectarian, tribal civil wars raging across the region that we neither understand nor can measurably mitigate.
Liz, Mitt Romney was criticized a lot this week, not just by Democrats, but even by some of his fellow Republicans for responding too quickly and for what he was saying in his response. You actually are not among those critics. You think he got it right.
I think he did get it right. I think that actually the statement this week that should have received more criticism and attention was the president's. When the president went into the Rose Garden 24 hours after the Cairo embassy attack, rightly, of course, condemned the killing of our ambassador in Libya, failed to even mention the Cairo attack. And, I think that in a situation in which an embassy's been attacked, the flag's been ripped down, the Al-Qaeda flag has been flown, that America's president not to even mention it clearly sends a signal to radicals across the region. And, I would disagree with George to the extent that we've now had 3.5 years of Obama policy. And it looks an awful lot like whether you're talking about the Mexico City speech in 2009, the Cairo speech in 2009, the extent to which he's been apologizing for America. He's abandoned some of our key allies like Israel, Poland, Czechoslovakia. He's attempted to appease our enemies, the Iranians, for example, the Russians. He's now getting ready, as we watch these scenes unfold on the air, to slash our defense. And the defense sequestration includes over $120 million for embassy security. And so the president himself got a terrible record on national security, and it's clearly something that Governor Romney ought rightly to be pushing.
I suspect, General Clark, that you disagree with what Liz Cheney just said.
I do disagree, because I think this is a consistent Republican narrative that Democrats are soft on defense. We've got a Democratic president who's been strongest on national security, who's completely taken the foreign policy and national security argument away from the other side. He reinforced in Afghanistan. He got us responsibly out of Iraq. We took Osama bin Laden. He's been firm. He's been visionary. He's been tough. He's decisive. So I know what the Republican narrative wants to be, but when you get below the rhetoric, there are no facts to support these charges. In fact, we've worked anti-missile defense. Poland's happy. Other nations in Europe seem to be happy. We've got the strongest relationship with Israel I think we've ever had. Very good relations there. So I just don't find much ground in these comments from the Republicans.
And John, let me just go to some polling because I want you to weigh in on this. If you look at how the American people feel about who would be better when it comes to foreign policy and terrorism, trust to handle foreign policy, Obama 51%, Romney 38%. Trust to handle terrorism, Obama 51%, Romney 40%. That was Tuesday in ABC News Washington Post poll, so obviously the events of this last week have not factored into it. Could the events of the last week change those numbers?
They sure could. It's a question of where it goes. I mean, I think, Liz, despite what you're saying, I think even the Romney campaign thinks they mishandled the way they initially played this. Look at the difference in tone from Mitt Romney between when he came out right after the attack to where he is now.
Well, the Romney campaign doesn't always get it right.
Well, there you go. But in terms of the longer-term implications here, this is really a potential danger for the president. There will be questions asked. No doubt there will be hearings up on Capitol Hill about what happened, why there was not more security in Benghazi. There will be questions about the overall situation in the Middle East. Was this really about one YouTube video or trailer for a movie that had been out for months actually, and was finally translated into Arabic and put on an extremist television show in Egypt, or is there something more fundamental going on? This was a president who was going to, transform our relations with the rest of the world, particularly with the Arab world, and now the Arab world is to a degree inflamed with very visible anti-Americanism. That's the kind of thing that could potentially erode the president's numbers long term, even though Mitt Romney severely mishandled the situation.
And Gwen, how much do voters care about foreign policy? How much could this actually change the course of this election?
Not much immediately, but I find it really interesting, Jake, that a week ago we were post-convention, completely consumed what we talked about this convention, not foreign policy, not at either convention, unless you count every Democrat talking about Osama bin Laden. Other than that, nobody really. I picked up on that. But I find it striking that Liz would say the Romney campaign doesn't always get it right. That shows a little bit of disagreement within the Republican Party about how this week went. But more interestingly to me, getting back to your question, I don't think people were paying attention to this, even though you can argue very clearly that this is the most important power that any president would have. So it boils down to a point that Mitt Romney was really trying to make after all the timing issues, which is who is in a better position to lead. A tough position, if you are the guy trying to take out the incumbent, is to make the case that you would be better. Of course the president does better in this poll because he is the president. He is currently the commander-in-chief. But I don't know that Americans, when they go to the polls, in the end, are going to say, well, I think I like the way he handled Benghazi. He's going to say, does it feel like a leader to me? Does it feel like someone who can be president? And that's what was tough for Mitt Romney this week.
Liz?
I want to clarify. I think that the governor handled it exactly right when he went out and condemned the embassy statement. Jonathan's point that the campaign somehow feels like it needs to back off is where I would fault them if that is true. I cannot imagine a more important set of issues. And I think, frankly, it would be a tragedy for the nation if President Obama is allowed to effectively claim that he's been a successful national security president. And it'd be a tragedy for the nation if the Romney campaign doesn't push this issue very hard. I know how deeply Governor Romney cares about the country, so I hope very fervently that they will continue to push this hard. But there's no question but that we're weaker than we were when Barack Obama took office, and if he has 4 more years, we may well be unrecognizable.
Actually, I don't think we are weaker. I think the whole point of going into Afghanistan in 2001, which President George W. Bush articulated, was Osama bin Laden wanted dead or alive, and it was Barack Obama who really put the pressure on and got it.
Once again, Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, but I think it's a huge. It was a huge marker. It was a presidential decision and he was very much aware of President Carter's problem with Desert One, and he did it against the advice.
Are you at all uncomfortable though with how political that? I mean, at the national political convention, this military operation is used as a political talking point over and over again.
But here's the thing, Jonathan. We've had, since the Vietnam War, the consistent refrain has been Republicans as a daddy party, Democrats are the mommy party. Republicans are strong, robust. Democrats are soft and weak and want to negotiate, want to apologize. It's simply not true. We're stronger. We're safer. Barack Obama has been a very robust, muscular foreign policy. And as George said earlier, what's happened in the Middle East has lots of factors and lots of clauses underneath. It has nothing to do with rhetoric from Washington.
George Russell's list of muscular actions by the president, you could add the use of drones, which has been extremely aggressive, more aggressive both in the number of attacks and the places where the attacks are made than under George W. Bush. I really do not think it's fair to fault the president for throwing Israel under the bus, as they say. Granted, he has a bad relationship with my good friend Netanyahu, but the relationship between the U.S. military and the Israeli military, which is 98% of the point of this relationship, are quite good. But politically, our profession, graphic journalism with all these pictures of things in flames, tends to give the country the sense that the world is somehow in chaos. The world's always dangerous and all that, but the chance of dying on this planet from organized state violence is lower than it has been since the 1920s.
It's the disorganized state violence, I think, or non-state violence that everyone's worried about when they look at a map and see protests in 20 different places.
Yes, but it beats the heck out of wars.
But with respect to the state of Israel, George, look, you're in a situation now, in the last 48 hours, the President of the United States reportedly has offered to meet with the Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt, who, at a minimum, allowed the attack on our embassy, and has refused to see Benjamin Netanyahu. There's simply no way that you can claim that relationship is not strained.
It is unpresidential peevishness, I take that point.
And given the fact that Israel's facing an existential threat, which is also a threat to the U.S. with respect to a nuclear-armed Iran, and frankly, the one effective program that we may have had in place that would have been able to slow or stop that nuclear program, the Stuxnet cyber warfare activity, which according to the New York Times, members of the President's National Security Team leaked to them.
Well,
so this President's record is clearly
I asked this
abysmal.
question about refusing to meet with Netanyahu. I'm not in the administration, so I wasn't part of this, but I asked it. I don't think there's been any direct request to meet, and I don't think there's been a refusal. There's daily contacts between Israeli government officials in the United States. Secretary of State Clinton has been out there meeting people. We know very well the positions on all sides, the uncertainties, the intelligence, the information is shared, planning is shared. It's very close. This is a question of the best way to bring this Iranian program to a halt.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Week. I'm Jake Tapper.
I want to switch topics right now to a hardening we've seen in conventional wisdom about the state of Iraq of the election. We've seen in Friday these 3 swing state polls came back indicating in Ohio Obama's up 7 points, Virginia Obama is up 5 points, Florida Obama's up 5 points. And George, one of the amazing things is Mitt Romney is no longer in polling beating Obama on trust to handle the economy,
which is his campaign in one sentence. Those 3 states have one thing in common. They all have Republican governors. And all 3 Republican governors are bragging, perhaps rightfully so, that they have got their economies up and running. If you add Wisconsin with Scott Walker to that list, you have a tension, a kind of disconnect between the interests of the Republican governors in the swing states and the interests of the Romney campaign.
John, what's going on behind the scenes here?
Well, one thing that's happened is during the Democratic convention, the Romney campaign essentially went dark, and what you have seen is just an absolute bombardment, particularly in Ohio and in Florida, from the Obama campaign, hammering Romney on, especially in Ohio, on the auto bailout. I mean, there was a Romney advisor who told me that famous headline that Romney himself did not write, "Let Detroit go bankrupt," could be the headline that costs the election. They have gone in and actually outspent dramatically the Romney campaign over the last few weeks, which is incredible when you think that the Romney campaign actually has more money.
It's particularly interesting because the automobile companies went bankrupt. And so the argument between Romney and the administration on the auto bailout is one of nuanced degree and law.
And also intent. Because what President Obama has said is there is a way to move this economy forward. And Governor Romney's plans, they really don't show that way. And he's talking about tax cuts for the wealthy, closing loopholes, and sort of letting things take their course. And that's been his philosophy.
Although you have the Obama campaign entirely talking about something that happened during the first 6 months of the Obama administration.
It's true.
But it's not all true.
But there are other things going on, Jonathan. There's a big manufacturing initiative going on. And all through the administration, people are working to try to restart and re-energize American manufacturing. The Pentagon's working on DOD procurement.
We have more Americans unemployed at any time than since 1980. I mean, I think this administration has, at best, a real misunderstanding about the difference between activity and action. And I thought what was particularly interesting was that at the Democratic National Convention, certainly not from the president, you never heard the word record. They don't want to talk about it. They can't talk about it because the record has been so bad. As bad as we just were talking about, it's been on national security. It's been worse on the economy.
Actually, it hasn't. We created 6.4 million private sector jobs. Now, we have lost state and municipal jobs because these municipalities and states have to reduce.
It depends when you start counting. But Gwen, we have to take a break. But before we take the break, go.
Okay, we can talk about Ohio, which is about the bailout. But you talk about Virginia and Florida, you're talking about different things. Especially in Florida, where we're talking about Medicare, and those are the ads, and that's the spending, and that's the rhetoric. Especially with the addition of Paul Ryan to the ticket, which has got people paying attention. In Virginia, in many ways, it's the northern part of Virginia, which is more susceptible to what's happening in Washington and is listening to the debate more closely. And in the southern part of Virginia, which is more military and seems to be susceptible to the argument that the Obama administration is making. Because we live in Washington, we're seeing a lot of these ads. And we cannot underestimate how much of this has to do with the unpopular governors in Ohio and Florida, and how much of it has to do with the effective advertising in all of those states.
Thanks to all of you. The conversation will continue online. General Clark, Liz Cheney will answer your questions on Twitter at General Clark and at Liz_Cheney. Just use the hashtag This Week. Your voice this week is coming right up. But first,
3 moments from this week history. What year was it?
We have raised this memorial to commemorate the service and sacrifice of an entire generation.
The World War II Memorial Open.
It's taken 17 years, almost 3 times as long as the war commemorates, for the memorial to go from idea to reality.
There are a few American troops who dishonored their country and disregarded our values.
We learned about the torture of prisoners at Abu Ghraib.
I'm appalled. That is not how the American military acts or should act.
And 52 million people watched as Friends signed off.
Please stay with me. I am so in love with you.
Was it 2003, 2004, or 2005? We'll be right back with the answer. So what year was it? When did the Abu Ghraib prison scandal break and the World War II Memorial open? It was 8 years ago, 2004. And finally, your voice this week. Today's question comes from Nancy Berkeley, who asks, who are you going to vote for? Nancy, the truth is, I don't vote in races I cover. After I became a reporter, I found that after I voted absentee ballot on a race I covered, it felt like I'd made an investment, and it was an uncomfortable feeling. So while I believe an active voting public to be vital to our republic, and I revere voting, I don't feel as though I can do the best job I can bringing you fair and impartial coverage of politicians if I feel in any way invested in those politicians. Now, other reporters feel differently, and I in no way judge that. I'm not trying to be holier than thou. This is just my personal view. And just a reminder, you can ask me questions all week long on Twitter at Jake Tapper. That's all for us today. Thanks for sharing part of your Sunday with us. Check out World News with David Muir tonight. George Stephanopoulos will see you back here next week. And Happy Jewish New Year.
When breaking news changes the world in an instant, ABC News. Accurate, credible, unmatched. On television, radio, and the internet. This is ABC News.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. Face Off.
We got to win in Virginia. We will win Ohio.
Hours away from that crucial first debate, both sides work the refs and game expectations.
He's trying to fool people into thinking that I think things I don't. And that ends, I think, during the debate.
Romney is a very good debater. He's practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced.
Both the moderator and Obama are going to come after it.
Romney's actually pretty good on his feet in debates.
The big questions. Can Romney reset his campaign with a strong debate? Or with early voting underway,
vote for Obama.
Is it too late for a turnaround? 4 years from his last debate, you were wrong. Will President Obama be rusty? Or can he break the race wide open? We'll ask our headliners, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and the president's top political advisor, David Plouffe. And insight and analysis on our Powerhouse Roundtable. Squaring off, former party chairs Haley Barbour and Howard Dean, plus Donna Brazile, Matthew Dowd, and Maggie Haberman of Politico.
From ABC News, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's your voice, your vote. Reporting from ABC News Election Headquarters, George Stephanopoulos.
Hello again. We are heading into the home stretch of this campaign, just 37 days before the final votes, with all eyes on this week's first debate. The candidates are hunkering down in debate camp, but all our guests ready to weigh in on where the race stands, what to expect Wednesday, and what it all means for the final weeks of this race. White House advisor David Plouffe standing by for the president. Let's begin with the Romney camp and the man.
長い将棋やな、もうこれ。
New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Good morning, Governor Christie.
Good morning, George.
So, since the convention, Governor Romney has fallen behind in the national polls, behind the battlegrounds. New polls out this morning, Ohio and Iowa behind in both. I know that we just were laughing about the expectation setting on both sides, but Governor Romney has to shake things up Wednesday night, doesn't he?
He's going to. I mean, every time Mitt Romney has been confronted in this campaign with one of these moments, he has come through in the debate and performed extraordinarily well, laying out his vision very clearly and also contrasting himself and his vision with whoever his opponent was at that time. So I have absolute confidence that when we get to Thursday morning, George, all you're going to be shaking your head saying it's a brand new race with 33 days to go.
So how does he do it, though? Because you said several months ago, the more we see of Governor Romney, the more voters are going to like him. That hasn't happened yet. On the one hand, he has to be assertive with the president, but likable to voters. How does he manage that balance?
Be truthful. I mean, listen, all he's going to do is go out there and tell the truth, because if you tell the truth about what's going on in our country, people are going to understand that that's critical of the president's stewardship, but also to lay out a positive and hopeful vision for what the future can be for our children and grandchildren under a Romney administration. I think he can do both. Listen, Mitt Romney can walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm not worried.
How do you handicap President Obama as a debater?
He's good. Listen, and I love all this stuff. I heard Ed Rendell the other day, he hasn't debated in 4 years. Poor President Obama. He's only been leader of the free world and commander-in-chief of our military during that time. I think he's had a few debates inside the White House over time, and I think he'll be very good. President's always been good, and he'll be good on Wednesday night. But he can't change the facts. And that's going to be the problem for the president.
He's been making the closing arguments in the battleground states. 2-minute ad, straight to camera. Here's a portion of it.
Governor Romney believes that with even bigger tax cuts for the wealthy and fewer regulations on Wall Street, all of us will prosper. In other words, he doubled down on the same trickle-down policies that led to the crisis in the first place.
If you were on the stage Wednesday night, how would you respond to that?
Stop lying, Mr. President.
Lying?
Yeah. That's what I'd say.
What's the lie there?
Governor Romney's not talking about more tax cuts for the wealthy. In fact, what he said is that the wealthy will pay just as much under a Romney administration as they pay today.
The tax rate will go down into the 20s.
Right, but the tax rate will go down, but they will lose deductions and other loopholes that will have them paying the same. That's what Governor Romney's plan is. And so what I'd say is, I love those ads. I mean, the president gets to say things like 1 million new manufacturing jobs. Well, how, Mr. President? We're still waiting. $4 trillion reduction in the debt. Really, Mr. President? How? Simpson Bowles? You haven't endorsed your own plan, nor has he come forward with a plan. I mean, it's a great ad. I have no doubt about that. It sounds really nice and it looks nice, but there's nothing substantive there.
But I can imagine the comeback from President Obama at that point when you say, where are the details? That same question to be put to Governor Romney. You called for hard truths in the convention, but Governor Romney has not been willing to lay out which deductions are going to go away for the wealthy.
Oh, listen, the President of the United States has an obligation after 4 years as being president to be the one who is the most specific.
So the challenger doesn't have to?
Oh, I didn't say he doesn't have to. I said he has a greater obligation. The President of the United States hasn't stepped up to the plate and done that. That ad does nothing to add to the debate and discussion, except to not tell the truth. I mean, he starts off by not telling the truth, which is that the President says Governor Romney wants more tax cuts for the rich. I mean, it's just not true. Governor Romney has said it over and over and over again. The rich will not pay less under his tax plan.
Overall as a share, but their tax rates will come down.
Yeah, but George, if it's like saying, you change the rates, but if the same amount of money's coming out of my pocket or your pocket, you don't care what the rate is. If the same amount of money's coming out, you're not paying less. And I think what we're trying to do is to set up a system where America can be more competitive in its tax rates, both on a corporate level and on an individual level with the rest of the world, because we're now competing in a global economy. And so that's what Governor Romney's laying out, is a very clear vision on that. And guess what he's going to do? He's going to negotiate with Congress about those loopholes. That's what he's going to do. He's not going to lock himself into something now.
Don't voters have a right to know what those are?
Voters have a right to know what direction he's going to take the country in. And he says he's going to eliminate significant deductions and loopholes so that no one is paying less in the wealthy class than they are before. That's very clear. And here's one thing he knows that the president's never learned. 85% of his legislature was Democratic in Massachusetts when he was governor. I work with a Democratic legislature in New Jersey. You can lay out aspirational goals and visions, but then you got to get down to negotiating with people to get things done. In Washington, D.C., the president draws hard lines and doesn't ever know how to negotiate and compromise. That's why we're in the gridlock we're in today.
Governor Romney's been getting a lot of advice from some pretty anxious conservatives. One of them is Charles Krauthammer, who wants a bigger, bolder campaign. I want to read some of what he said the other day. He says, "Go large, Mitt. For 6 months, Romney has been matching Obama's small ball for small ball, hit-and-run critique here, a slogan of the week there. His only momentum came when he chose Paul Ryan, yet he has since retreated to the small and safe. When you're behind, however, safe is fatal." Do we need a bigger, bolder campaign for Mitt Romney?
Well, I think what we need is a big and bold performance on Wednesday night, and that's what he's going to give us. I have absolute confidence in that. And the fact is that the ideas are there, but let's face it, George, there's been a lot of filtering going on, and I'm not going to sit here and complain about coverage in a campaign, because as a candidate, if you do that, you're losing. But what I will tell you is this is the first moment when the American people are going to be able to see these two guys side by side, laying out their vision, unfiltered. And I think that's going to be a powerful moment for Mitt Romney. And I think folks like Charles Krauthammer will be happy on Thursday morning, certainly happier than they are now.
You alluded to, do you buy this argument that some conservatives are making that the polls are skewed against Mitt Romney?
I don't buy that.
Not true, right?
I don't know if it's, I don't think it's intentional. I think, you look at every different poll and look at its methodology and you can say whether it's good or bad poll. But do I think there's a concerted effort to skew the polls against Governor Romney? No, I don't buy that.
Final question. Senator Todd Aiken running for Senate down in Missouri. Last week, the Republican National Committee Chair Ryan Spears was here saying that RNC is not going to get involved in this race. But over the course of the week, we're seeing more prominent Republicans, Senator Jim DeMint, Tom Coburn, Lindsey Graham, all coming out in support of Todd Aiken. Do you think he should have the support of the Republican Party?
No.
No?
No, I don't.
And he doesn't have your support?
No, he doesn't.
Governor Chris Christie, thanks very much for your time this morning. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Week. I'm George Stephanopoulos. Let's turn now to the White House view. The president's top strategist, David Plouffe, he is running debate prep, part of the debate prep for President Obama coming up in the next couple days. He joins us now. You just heard Governor Christie right there, David Clough. He says the president is not going to tell the truth on Wednesday night.
Well, of course we are, George. First of all, Governor Christie, and I think this is clearly the Romney belief, is raising expectations for what's going to happen in this debate. I mean, they're predicting that the race will change fundamentally. What does that mean? That means states like Ohio and Iowa, become very close and tightened up. So there'll be a way to measure this. And now challengers tend to do really well in debates. That's been the history. We've believed all along that Governor Romney probably has more benefit out of this debate potentially than we do. But what we're going to tell the American people on Wednesday night, as we have through the whole campaign, is exactly where we are as a country, where we need to go, how we rebuild an economy that makes the middle class secure, and with great detail so people understand if this president gets reelected, what he's going to do for them, for the middle class, in the next 4 years.
You just heard from Governor Christie. He says that when the president says that the wealthy are going to get a tax cut, that is a lie from President Obama.
Strong words and not true. Listen, analysts have looked at this. Someone who makes over $3 million a year would get over $250,000 tax cut if Governor Romney's plan were to be enacted. And let's just step back. It's a $5 trillion tax cut, $2 trillion in defense spending, by the way, that our Pentagon and our military leadership says we don't know, another $1 trillion to extend all the Bush tax cuts. That's $8 trillion. The notion that somehow by closing loopholes for the wealthy, that the middle class is going to be held harmless, the middle class needs to understand. If Mitt Romney wins this presidential election, they're going to be paying the bill, not to reduce the deficit, not to reduce jobs, but to give huge tax cuts to the wealthy. So we're happy to have that debate because we think the facts are on our side.
This idea that the president's not going to be telling the truth has become a theme inside the Romney campaign. A couple weeks ago, I sat down with Governor Romney. Here's what he said. You learned as you studied all this about President Obama as a debater. What are you looking for?
Well, I think he's going to say a lot of things that aren't accurate. And, I'd be tempted to go back to that wonderful line by Ronald Reagan, there you go again.
Now, President Obama has admitted in that 60 Minutes interview that your campaign has gone overboard at times with the rhetoric. Are you worried that President Obama's going to have a rough night with the fact checkers on Wednesday?
Absolutely not. Listen, George, we still believe this is going to be a close race. There's no doubt that it will tighten. We're not going to win battleground states by 10 or 11 points. But the reason, Governor Romney's having a rough patch here is not because of what we're saying about his plans. It's his plans. Okay? And, you ought to start by first looking in the mirror. People do not want to go back to the same trickle-down policies that helped cause a recession in the first place. They don't think that's going to help them or their family. From a leadership standpoint, for the last couple of weeks, obviously, he said some things around the attacks in Egypt and Libya that raised real questions, but also this 47% comment. I think the message that sends to the American people is if he's already written off half the country, says that they're not his concern, that they're victims, that they won't take personal responsibility. So we're happy to have a debate about our economic plans, our tax plans, where we want to take the country in terms of health care and education. And by the way, it is rich. George, you've covered this race very carefully. Governor Romney, during the primary, eviscerated his opponents. When they complained, he said, stop whining. And this is someone who's questioned the president on things like the president's trying to make us a less Christian nation, and we're apologizing for America. So give me a break. Presidential campaigns are tough, but we're saying is the truth about what Governor Romney wants to do. Now, that may be inconvenient because the people aren't accepting it, but we're very confident with the case we're going to make proactively about the president and how that contrasts with Governor Romney.
The governor has shown that he can be tough in these debates, as you point out. Now, we're seeing some reports that he's preparing some zingers to get under the president's skin, and the president has, at times in debates in the past, seemed a little impatient, a little irritable. How worried are you about that?
Well, I think the president views this as part of the entire campaign. Our convention, the events we do in battleground states, the ads we're running, now the debate. It's just a chance to have a conversation with the American people about where we are as a country, where we need to go to help the middle class be more secure. Now, Governor Romney, clearly, they've been practicing these zingers and lines for months. So I'm sure they'll have a bunch of clever lines. But that's ultimately not what the American people are looking for. So, there may be some that judge those to be, ranked well. But the American people are going to be listening for not a clever line, but a good idea to help move this country forward and help them and their family. And that's what our focus is going to be. So, listen, he's prepared more than any candidate, I think, maybe in history, certainly in recent memory. So we believe Governor Romney he's been a good debater in the past. He's very prepared. He's got all these clever zingers and lines in his pocket. So we understand he'll probably have a good night on Wednesday night.
You mentioned Governor Romney's response to the attacks on the consulate in Benghazi. The president and his team have also come in for some questions about that as well. And the stories about what exactly happened that day. You and Ambassador Susan Rice, in the days after that attack on this program, said it was a spontaneous response, all the evidence showed, to an anti-Muslim film. Since then, we've learned that it was an organized attack and that some intelligence and Pentagon officials suspected that early on, and that has prompted this criticism from Governor Romney.
We've seen a confused, slow, and inconsistent response to the terrorist attack in Libya, a refusal to be frank with the American people about what happened, and a complete failure to explain the growing terrorist threat we face in the region.
The chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the House, Peter King, has gone even farther, calling on you and Ambassador Rice to resign. Your response?
Absolutely not. Susan Rice has done a terrific job for this country and the administration. George, there's been an ongoing investigation, and this is an event of great interest to the news media and the public, understandably. So there's been information provided real time. Obviously, you're going to know more about an event a week after it happens, and more 2 weeks after it happens than you do 1 week.
In the 24 hours after it happened, you suspected it was a terrorist attack.
Well, what Ambassador Rice and others were doing, we're going on what our intelligence agencies were saying at the moment. And obviously, once they became convinced that, in fact, this was an act of terrorism, that's been where we've all been. So let's talk about Governor Romney for a minute, George. We do have an election in 37 days. And we're happy to have a debate about our approach to terrorism and foreign policy. This president promised a few things in 2008. He'd end the Iraq War. He did. He would take the fight to al-Qaeda and degrade them. He has. He would focus on bin Laden and bring them to justice. We did. Governor Romney called the ending of the Iraq War tragic. He said on that secret 47% tape, actually, it was unthinkable we didn't leave 20,000 troops behind in Iraq. He wouldn't have brought the surge troops home from Afghanistan that we just recovered. And he said famously in 2008, he wouldn't have gone into Pakistan to get bin Laden. So we're going to have a foreign policy debate later in this election. These are important issues, and not just from a foreign policy standpoint. One of the reasons that we have huge deficits is we have these unpaid wars. So I think the voters also view these foreign policy issues through the prism of the economy.
Little preview of Wednesday night. David Plouffe, thanks very much.
Thanks, George.
And we'll be right back with our Powerhouse Roundtable. Quick change here. George Will is off today, but we're joined by Donna Brazil on the roundtable, Matthew Dowd, Maggie Haberman of Politico, and two former party chairs, former Vermont Governor Howard Dean for the Democrats, former Governor of Mississippi Haley Barbour for the Republicans. Welcome to all of you. And Matthew Dowd, let me begin with you and just setting the stage of where the race is right now. We see President Obama ahead by about 5 points nationally, right now ahead in all of the battleground states. What happened in September?
Well, I think, this race, if it's a 5-point race, which it roughly is, despite of all of the Republicans' accusations that the polling is wrong.
Not from Chris Christie.
Well, no, and to his credit, he basically accepted reality, which is what you have to do before you can change reality. And I think that's what Romney's problem is when you look at this, the national number is 5 or 6, which means all the target states are going to be somewhere around that national number. All of those states, Ohio, Virginia, Florida, are going to all flow with this. What I think what happened to the Romney campaign, and it's almost, I think, political malpractice, is that for the summer and a big part of the convention time, they left the playing field totally to Barack Obama and the Obama campaign. They allowed them to outspend them in the summer. They allowed them during the conventions to outspend them, and basically set the tone for the final 60 days of this campaign, which put them behind after the conventions. I don't think the Romney folks expected to be behind, and now they're behind, and the prism of which voters view this is negative for Mitt Romney.
And Governor Barbour, something else happened. I want to put up a chart right here that shows what's happened to the polls. It comes from Nate Silver of the New York Times after that 47% comment right here. You see it right there. Look at how it opens up in that last week and a half. That was damaging.
Well, it may well end up being damaging, but the biggest thing that's damaging Mitt Romney here is this campaign is all about process. It's about polling. It's about campaign management. It's about everything but the issues. It's about everything but Obama's policies and the failures of those policies.
How does he turn that around?
Well, hopefully he'll just stay totally focused on the fact that for most Americans, you can't tell the difference between the recession and the recovery. In fact, Census Department data came out this last month. The average American family lost $2,500 of income during the Obama recovery. They only lost $1,500 worth of income during the recession. No wonder they don't think that the recession's over.
Donna, that is kind of astonishing. The National Journal put it as the President Obama defying gravity right now. You see unemployment above 8%, income's going down, yet the president leading by 5 points.
Well, I was looking at some of the recent polls, and 42% of the country believe that the country is in better shape. They believe that the next year will be better. So despite all of the doom and gloom and the cold towel and the wet water that the Republicans continue to throw over the modest but slow economic recovery, most Americans are feeling a little bit better. It's not good enough to go home and write out the next check to the Obama campaign, but it's good enough for the Obama campaign to believe that they have just a slight win at their back.
But and one thing that's working for the Maggie Haberman is it does seem that voters have accepted kind of a mediocre economy.
Yeah, that's right. There's this new normal feeling, right? This is where we are. And in that paradigm, the president is doing better. I mean, the right track, wrong track is still underwater, but it has improved for the president. And so people feel their lives are not great. Mitt Romney is also not offering an alternative, and I think that's the problem. I think we're not hearing enough forward-looking presentation from
Maggie Haberman mentions this right track, wrong track Governor Dino. So one of the most surprising things to me, you've seen coming into this year, close to 70% of the public thought we were going in the wrong direction. Now it's coming down below 60% in some polls. And I guess it leads to a question, do people really think things are getting better, or are they adjusting their